Well, after having spent 5 days with this game, about a 31-hour run overall, I think I can safely say that this is the Dark Souls of FPSs. Now, I'm not sure, but get out of here, get out of here. I'm not sure what else to add to that, but since it is my job, I'll try to do the best that I can. We had a rare treat with this particular game, because I actually got to have the developer pop in during chat during a couple of the streams, which made me extremely self-conscious, if I'm being honest. There's always been... Anybody who knows me knows I don't actually like to give out negatives to games, unless it's a game that's actual garbage, which we don't review all that often. So, imagine there's always this barrier of, it's okay, because no one's ever going to watch my videos, no one's ever going to see my reviews, no one's ever going to actually go through that and be like, oh my gosh, he thought this and that about this? Oh, like imagine making something and having someone critique it and pointing out the flaws and issues in it and just being like... And so the whole time I'm sitting there going, but I can't stop, right? Like I can't pull back from doing that. Not only would that be, a straight up lie, which I'm a terrible liar, but more to the point, it would be a disservice, right? Even though it kind of sucks, if something does have issues or flaws or needs to be pointed out, then it needs to be pointed out, right? At least that's the mentality that I always go into it with. Still, regardless of the going through that, one of the things that was really awesome about having the dev in chat was I could ask questions I normally don't get to ask. That's another thing. Most people don't ever ask questions that actually matter. You ever notice that when it comes to interviews? It's like, so, why was your game... Excuse me. Fake news here. Fake gamer news. Why was your game so awesome? Do we expect... They always ask like the really dumb question, like, are we going to have customization options in your game? What's the DLC policy? They never ask something that actually matters. And so it was nice to be able to ask, specific individual questions. And one of the first ones I had was, why this engine? Which, of course, I keep forgetting the name of. It's the free Doom engine. It's DFX Doom or something like that. And I was like, why? And the answer was actually really down to earth and really interesting. Because it's a free, easy-to-use engine. And I was just like, yeah, no, that tracks. That makes perfect sense. I myself have done the same thing quite a few times and quite a few other things. In fact, this is going to sound really pathetic, but I actually did a lot of custom stuff back in Warcraft 3. Not because Warcraft 3's engine was super amazing, but because it was a very user-intuitive, very user-friendly, free engine that I could just make maps in and do stuff with, right? I'm sure I'm not exactly alone in that one. So that tracked, and I'm like, cool, awesome. And it was just neat to have them there. But, as always, I like to start a little bit on the gameplay axis and then move on to the story axis. The gameplay is mixed. No, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I feel like the game is hampered by the fact that it is in the vehicle of an FPS. Because make no mistake, this is not actually a first-person shooter in any sense that matters. This is an RPG, full tilt. This thing has, strong story focus and quests that have branching, all roads lead to Rome quest design, which is actually awesome, by the way. For those of you who've never heard me use that phrase, because we haven't talked about that recently, it's when you always start at A and you always end at B, but how you go between these points can vary. There's multiple methods of progression, which is a much more reasonable and much more doable kind of a thing than a true branching narrative, true choice gameplay, in which you start at A and you can end up at B, C, D, E, or F. That's much harder to pull off from a gameplay perspective, as we've talked about several times when it comes to quite a few games of the BioWare variety in the past. So, all roads lead to Rome quest design. Cool. Very heavy narrative focus. Cool. He does this thing where there's these map clusters, where there's actually 3 or so maps, which are they're all different maps, but he's maintaining variables across them. And you just kind of move between them, forming what is effectively an overworld. And thus you actually have dungeons and bosses and all that kind of fun stuff. And puzzles. Gotta have puzzles, and you get this item, and it allows you to get this thing, which allows you to get these other 4 things, and those 4 things allow you to do this. It's an RPG. None of this is a complaint, by the way. Again, Warcraft 3 comparison. But I find myself looking at this and wondering if an FPS RPG was the overall best approach here, because I admit, it took a while for me to really mentally shift myself into that perspective. After all, I've reviewed quite a few FPSs at this point in time. I've actually got a pretty good system down for it, a pretty good vibe and feel for it. And I walked into this expecting an FPS straight, and absolutely did not get that. one of the first things that really jumped out at me was a weird focus off of encounter design. So I want to talk about that briefly. Now, I'm not going to give the whole speech I gave on stream because that took a while, because I zoomed in the camera a lot more than I usually do. And you don't want to hear me talk about encounter design and enemy design. But encounter design and enemy design, as well as terrain design, which is usually what we call arena design, are pretty much the hallmarks of how you kind of make this thing work, along with two other things, which is itemization and kit. So the kit is what you have. Guns, items you can use, that's generally it for an FPS. The itemization is how those are distributed across the level and how those are dropped. So in some of the more recent Dooms, itemization, the fact that you can kill an enemy to gain... kill an enemy with a chainsaw to get ammo drops, and then you can kill an enemy with the raged up mode in order to actually get the brutal kill. Get the brutal kill. That gives you the health and ammo and so forth and so on. Being able to shoot the enemies with fire in order to get armor to drop out of them. That is actually part of itemization because it's how the game is funneling the items to you to help you keep going forwards, right? And of course, there's more traditional itemization, which is just static drops, either from enemies, specific enemy types, or just throughout the level, right? Itemization, kit, then we have terrain design. This is usually what we call arena design when it comes to FPSs. How interesting is the area in which you're fighting? Probably the most boring thing we could ever possibly have is an empty cube. Not that this game does this, I'm just giving that as an example. But, there's all sorts of things that go into that, allowing for multiple levels, giving the player areas where they have access to free movement to maneuver around the enemies, try to flank the enemies, try to bottleneck the enemies, try to not get bottlenecked themselves. It's usually about how much choice the player has in where they can move and where. And when, I can talk. I'm still recovering from being sick. Please apologize. Please accept my apologies, because I can't even apologize correctly. Oh my god. I'm just going to replace... Where's that shark puppet? I just need to bring the shark puppet up here. Have a little Mai Tai. But all of that is all the framework that then connects to encounter design and enemy design. I'm going to pull two examples of this and why I bring this up right here. Because enemy design, that's Half-Life. Half-Life leans heavily on which enemies you... Not which enemies you fight, but the enemies that you fight. Trying to make an encounter of 3 of X. Or trying to make those X's very interesting, trying to make them something that they do. Maybe they have really good AI, maybe they have good pathing, maybe they have the good scripting, maybe they have unique attacks or special abilities or whatever, right? I'm sure you could think of plenty of examples of games that focus on enemy design to make encounters interesting. Most Doom games do not have good enemy design. Before you jump down my throat, what I mean by that is the enemy design isn't the focus. They don't try to make this one enemy fascinating or interesting or engaging or whatever. Instead, they try to give them a gimmick. Usually that boils down to 3 different things. How they move, how they attack, how they are attacked. Okay? So these three things, the third thing's kind of like a weakness sort of a thing or whatever. But anyways, these 3 things all kind of combine to make what the enemy design is. Cool. So how is an encounter in Doom interesting? Encounter design. In other words, trying to specifically have different types of enemies in different combinations which try to funnel a player towards or away from a specific tactic when it comes to fighting them. You could have enemies that do bounce back. So let's use this game in specific. You could have 3 of your shield warriors up front here. They reflect the rockets that you shoot at them, but you can also always shoot around them. So, okay, and that's kind of it. You can use the flamethrower. You can use either of the 2 lobbing grenade things, the pink one or the green one. Or you can use the rocket launcher or crossbow. The crunch bow, I think they called it, some awesome name, and shoot it at the ground in order to just get them with splash damage. So, nothing really engaging there in the strictest sense of the word, but that's not encounter design. Encounter design is when you start adding other enemies into the mix and seeing how they can change up the encounter. So let's say you put 1 dog in there. So now you all of a sudden have an enemy that's going to be charging directly at you. This is going to discourage the player from using some types of weapons which might explode on their face, which include the acid lobber and the rocket launcher. But they might be more inclined to use the pink lobber, which will actually catch the dog in addition to them, and the flamethrower, except the flamethrower does less damage to the dog, but your primary fire mode for the flamethrower actually does plenty of damage to the frog, so that's another possibility. Then you can add something else, like one of the floaters. You can add one of the witches, which goes around. That does a little bit of area denial, so the player's not going to have to be moving while shooting this. Or maybe you can add in something like one of the elementals, which encourages you, again, towards the acid thing, because that's going to prevent them from spawning the extra ads when they die, and so forth and so on. Again, I'm not going to do this full zoom in that I did on stream, because that would just, because everyone would jump out of the computers and punch me in my face. And I don't like being punched in the face, personally, so instead I'm just going to say, this is encounter design. Why am I meandering all about this topic, though? Because it is my opinion, based on analysis, that this game had its encounters designed based on story, not gameplay. In other words, plenty of examples of where there's tons of enemies of a certain type, in a certain area, in certain formations, which make perfect sense for them to be there narratively, but don't make for an interesting encounter gameplay-wise. I cannot tell you how many times, to use a specific example, that I saw the initiates and the conscripts, which are both gameplay-wise functionally the same unit. They are slow shamblers who have a ranged attack that they use at you, which is a dodgeable attack, and they're both weak to flamethrower, which is one of the earliest weapons you get in the game, so there you go. And that's it. It's not interesting gameplay-wise, and so for a huge chunk of the game, I found myself more and more de-invested in simply bothering to fight enemies, because there wasn't really a lot of encounter design going on, and the enemy design, well, it was good, as was the kit. So you're probably thinking, well, then why wasn't that fun? Because this is a 30-hour game. I actually have a term for this. It's called Dragon Age 2 Syndrome. Now, to explain that in brief, for those of you who haven't heard me use it 7,000 times before, Dragon Age 2 Syndrome is when the core combat of your game is fun, but relatively shallow in its overall depth. So it's enjoyable, it's fun, it's popcorn, right? Or some cotton candy if you prefer. Or, I don't know what else there could be for that. Maybe like some nibbling. I've got some dried strawberries, would that count? They're actually really good. I'm looking forward to having some more after this for lunch. But anyways, the point being, it's fun, it's interesting, but it's not all that engaging, and the more you do it, the more it wears off. Like, it's like, okay, well, there's nothing new to it. This is a problem that actually a lot of RPGs run into. Mostly older RPGs, especially. You look at a lot of the NES and even the SNES era, and you get to the point where the encounters just drag on you. To show that I'm being fair about this, I'm even going to point to what I have said many times is my favorite game of all time, which is Final Fantasy VI, which has a huge amount of kit and decent enemy design and okay encounter design, and honestly kind of bad boss design, but that's neither here nor there. That game's combat gets old. It's not even that long of a game, maybe a 10, 15-hour game overall. But by the time you get to the end of it, it's just, you're tired. I'm tired of the combat because it's not all that in-depth. There's only so much you can do. It's fun, but simple. Make sense? And that's the core problem I had with this game. And the catch is, this isn't a 14-hour game. It's a 30-hour game. I was talking about this to a friend of mine, which he actually gave me this. I'll give credit to Pax on this. He gave me this idea because he pointed out, I kept comparing this game directly to Doom, specifically when it came to enemy itemization, encounter, arena, and kit design, because this game kind of smashes Doom off the map in most of those respects, with one big exception, that being encounter design. So I kept being weirded out, like, why am I so disengaged? Why am I so de-invested from the combat? And he was like, dude, Doom's like a 5-hour game. I was like, yeah, but... Oh. And it just clicked the moment he said that, how that works for me. Now you're probably thinking, well, how do you fix that? I have no idea. Normally I like to give ideas or concepts or ways you can work around this, but I actually got nothing on this one. The way that I actually fixed this was by a certain point of the game, I started ignoring combat. Now, believe it or not, that was fun for a bit, because running through giant swarms of enemies that can four-shot you is a little bit more engaging than it sounds, especially when it's like, ah! As you're just racing through. Because you get a feel for how the enemy bullets move and how their attacks move. You just gotta avoid melee of these ones, and jump over here, go here, around the corner, okay, pause. Chug a potion. Okay, keep going. So that's how I got around it. But even that only works so long, right? So I don't really have a good solution to that, I'm afraid. Now, what else do I want to talk about? I talked about encounter design, I talked about enemy design. There's a little bit of interface issue here. This is probably more of a me problem than anything else, but I wanted to go ahead and admit this. So there's an actual inventory. items and consumables that you can use in order to help boost you. I didn't use a lot of those, and you're probably thinking, why, Laura? Is it because you're dumb? The answer is yes, it is because I'm dumb. But it's because of the interface. Because this is a Doom game, actually moving through and figuring out what I had and how I could use and what I could use, it became slightly more irritating than it really felt like it should be. By the end of the game, I had memorized most of the, and by most of it, I mean some of the hotkeys for the items, but that still left me bereft of a way to really have a proper HUD of what I have, when, and where. Instead, in order to explain what I mean by that, little irritations tend to push me out of doing something in a video game. This is actually a regular thing. If there's something that's just kind of irritating to do in any game, I tend to not do that, even if it's valuable or useful or helps out in the situation, because it's kind of irritating to do. So in this game, you can actually hit the bracket keys, and that pulls up your inventory, and you can kind of sort through it and figure out what you've got and how many of you've got. You can hit enter to get a little bit of a text dump at the top, which tells you what that item does, which is neat. But the point is, at a glance, if I'm in the middle of a giant firefight with a bunch of enemies that I'm trying to rush through to get to this one specific spot and then kill all these flying gargoyles that are shooting lightning at me, I don't want to hit bracket and then bracket to figure out what I've got, when, and where, and how. A little HUD in the corner, for example, that just shows this is how many of this you've got, this is how many of this you've got, would be nice. And in fact, one of the things you could do with that HUD is you could have, like, the icon for the haste potion, for example, and then the letter H right by it. Actually, it'd be probably letter H, and then the icon, and then like the line, and then a number. You have 3 haste potions. You hit H to hit that haste potion. Boom, done. All the irritations are gone, and I would have been more inclined to do that. Simple stuff like that, right? There's some other issues with the HUD. I do feel like it's kind of hard to actually see which keys you have and which gun you have equipped. Or not, sorry, that's not what I mean at all. How much ammo you have for the gun you have equipped, because there's nothing distinguishing textures in several cases. There's no, like, outline or shadow or anything that kind of makes them pop out, so they kind of blend together a little bit. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, because Plutonia kept bringing up, the lighting in this game is interesting and actually does a bit of a disservice to visual distinction. So in several cases, it's kind of hard to tell what I'm looking at because some of the textures or colors just kind of merge a little bit, which in some of the areas certainly makes the game a little bit hard. Not hard. Irritating to navigate, which goes back to that earlier thing, which is a damn shame because I have to pause for a moment in my cavalcade of negativity to mention how really well designed the architecture is in this game. Now, I've been told by multiple people, including the dev himself, that he's an actual architect, so that makes sense. But I stand by that statement firmly, even without knowing that. I've said that, even without being aware of it, because it looks like places that actually exist. One of the things I talk a lot about is doodad design, which is usually about peppering a room with stuff so that room doesn't look blank and empty and weird and awkward. In this case, this is more like terrain doodads, because the terrain is morphed in a way, and the buildings and the houses and the cities and the structures are all morphed in a way that makes you feel like that's a place that actually exists. It really added to the flavor and tone of the game in a hugely positive way. I could talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. There's other things to mention here, but one of the things I really want to talk about, gameplay-wise especially, is how many times he played with the engine to do something cool or unique. So I'm officially going to get into spoilers at this point. Pause. If I haven't sold you on this game yet, it's because almost all of the positive things I have to say about the game are on the story axis, and I can't really talk about those without spoiling. So let me pause for a moment and say, I do absolutely recommend you try out this game. If you like FPSs in general, this isn't quite an FPS, but if you like RPGs in general, then this is definitely a game check out. I need to fire my sentence structure. My God, get out of there. Let's get someone new in there. There we go. Get a shark in there. This is a game worth checking out. There is definitely a lot on display, a lot of creativity, a lot of passion, a lot of fun. You can buy it on GOG or Steam. I actually have it on both. This is just a cool little thing. There's a DLC pack. It comes with some stuff. I don't even remember. It's like wallpaper and music and other stuff. Who cares, right? The DLC pack doesn't include any core gameplay stuff. It's just offered there for anybody who wants to support the dev. Which I did, consequently, and I went ahead and bought it on camera just to make the point, because absolutely I want to support the dev. In fact, I'm looking forward to a Hedon 3, because I'd really like to see where this story goes. So if none of that sells you on the game, I got nothing. I'll wait a moment for the spoiler people to be like, "Row." There you go. All right, cool. There's a section relatively early on where you have what I can only call a drug trip sequence, but you go back through a level you've already been through. But as you're going back through it, it's not only empty, but weird things keep happening through it. And you get to a certain part on the stage where the stage is morphing itself live on the fly. And then you keep going and you start going back through the parts of the stage you've already been through in like a mirror sort of a thing. Little moments like that really help elevate certain aspects of the game. And I really feel like whenever the developer played with the concept rather than just tried to make a chunk of enemies or an encounter, that's when the game really shined, is when it's like, okay, so you're going through this section, and now you have to dodge through these things, and you have to jump, do some large-scale platforming across these black boxes, which are just floating in a huge abyss. That's cool. That's awesome, and it helps push the story forwards. It wasn't until that mission that, I know this is going to sound so strange, I realized this game really had such a strong story focus. Because up until then, it had been very background. Demons. Okay, cool. Wait, who's this? What? Why is there a voice talking to my head? Oh my god! And it just kind of kept escalating from then on. There's a certain section later on in the game which is just bizarre, where you're in town and you could talk to NPCs and gain quests. And and again, it's just like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. You get a journal. You can hit J and just pull the journal up. Now, I should probably mention that most of what I'm talking about is in the quote-unquote second game. So there's Hedon 1, which is Crystal Heart, and then there's Hedon 2, which is Bloodrite, hence why my comment about wanting to see Hedon 3 earlier. If you go buy Hedon Bloodrite right now, if you go buy it on GOG or Steam, you're actually getting 1 and 2 in one pack, which, again, I highly recommend. So, forgive the nomenclature. But a lot of the really cool stuff didn't really happen until later on. He plays around with allies and turrets. You can use both to several extent. You can make crafting, by which I mean there is crafting sections where you can just put items in certain things and then they interact with this thing. And okay, put this in slot 2 and this in slot 3, and that produces this potion. Just little cool stuff like that. Again, it's playing with it. It's playing with the engine and playing with what it could do. And again, the cluster levels where you have effectively an overworld. And it's like, okay, we'll go and explore and figure out what to do. Okay, go over here and clear out this thing. Oh, that does this. And then, hey, we go back to town. And now the overworld gets updated. And that place you just cleared out, the fortress you just cleared out, is now filled with your own people who have occupied it in the wake of you rescuing several of them and clearing out the enemy. It's just cool little stuff like that is where the gameplay actually rose for me, which is good because I do have one last complaint about the gameplay. It's actually the worst thing about the gameplay. I know I talked a lot about encounter design, I talked about combat, but ultimately, remember, the combat was fun, just shallow and too long. There's one thing that is a true negative for me in this game. Platforming. I don't have anything to sugarcoat this. I have nothing to add to this. The game has Doom-esque platforming. Actually, no, to be completely clear, it feels a lot like Half-Life 1 platforming. You remember that? Skating around on ice skates as you're trying to go on a ledge that's actually this large. And in some cases, you can't even tell the ledge is there because the aforementioned visual distinction problem, because of the lighting issue. So you're just, oh my god. And there's so many sections which require precise platforming. Thankfully, the number of platforming sections actually went down as the game went onward, which is a good thing. The only time the platforming worked for me is when it was nice, big, open areas, as opposed to, for example, the Minotaur Town, which I'm not going to say anything else about. So platforming super sucks. I give it 3 negatives. I don't know what else to add to that. But I was talking about story. I mentioned Dark Souls earlier, and I don't really do that, didn't do that just as a gag, because the game has a very Dark Souls-y vibe to it. We get tidbits of story and narrative and background lore, world building as we're going throughout it, and we find out that this tribe of orcs that we are probably in the centuries range old. They never say that explicitly, but it sounds like we are all quite getting on in the years. We're half demon. We don't even find that out for a while. But we also find out that we're down here because we were exiled from the rest of the orc tribes. The other orcs were like, yeah, no, your job is to die. That's correct. And we decided not to do that. So we went down to the underground. We went to the Fountain of Life, gained the Fountain of Life, gained beauty and strength and glory, and were banished for it. So that's why we all came to the underground and just decided to live here. And that kind of went well and kind of didn't until we found something called the Crystal Heart, which is, let's call it what it is, a CD. It's very clearly technological in source and style. And it's like, oh, okay, we don't find that until the end of the Crystal Heart episode, by the way. Again, we're past the spoilers mark. And so we use that, and we work with it, and we help to terraform the underground into being an actually nice, decent place. And you're probably thinking, okay, cool, why don't they just use that to go back overground? Well, funny story. I mentioned background lore. One of the tiny little tidbits we learn is that the overworld is effectively dominated by the quote-unquote human kingdoms. Okay, well, what's so wrong about that? Well, the human kingdoms are also under the sway of the demons. Oh. In fact, the demons are so bad that they kind of have more dominance on the overworld than the underworld. They're from the underworld, by the way. And there's also some interactions between them and the dwarves and the minotaurs. And apparently the minotaurs and the dwarves fought a huge war against each other over however long, massively devastating, completely wrecked both nations, until they realized the war had been coerced into coming into action by the demons, and they united in their mutual hatred of the demons, along with us, the division, the Iron Division. And so we've got the orcs, the dwarves, the minotaurs all just kind of working together into this kind of coalition thing, which is really cool. And fighting against the demons and their human cultists. And this is also funny because the humans who, I say the human cultists, there's technically two groups of cultists. There's the cultists of self-worship, which I'm not going to get into. And then there's the cultists who have been perverted from self-worship into demon worship, which is exactly what it sounds like. And hence the demons have infiltrated the cult and taken over, and that's probably has something to do with how they're running some of the overworld kingdoms. We also know that there's some religious conflict between the self-worship group and the elemental god worship group, and all of this stuff is just kind of mostly peppered in the background, in little notes you can read, or in little tidbits you can interact with the NPCs on, and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And I love it. I love the construction. There's so many questions I still have, especially about the nature of how certain things work. For example, what's actually the difference between a goblin and an orc in this particular setting? Or why is it that the demons just kind of, where do the demons come from? Are they secretly fire elementals? That's kind of an inside joke, don't mind me. Although if they were the fire elementals, that would make so much sense. I'm just saying. Why is it that every 1,000 years an icon shows up to unify the demons? What the heck is going on with the elves? Why did the elves have this highly advanced technology thing? I should probably mention that the overall goal and plot of the main villain, who I'm not even going to name because she's just that unmemorable, is that she wants to get back to her spaceship. No, really. Now, she also refers to it as our spaceship when she's talking to the Blue Baron, who looks a whole lot like an Illithid. So that's interesting to think about. There's a lot of implications there that aren't really fleshed out, and I'm hoping that they will be more examined in the aforementioned Hedon 3. But at the end of the game, again, this is a massive spoiler, but at the end of the game, she succeeds in teleporting up to the ship. She's like, hey, I'm here, and everyone's dead. The ship is just wrecked, and all her fellow elves are dead. And it's like, oh, crap. And we see that this corruption crap has completely congealed over it. TBC. But I'd love to know more about our character. Why are we half demon blood? What was going on with, I'm not even trying to pronounce her name, our helper, our shadowy helper the whole time? And why is she a tiefling? What exactly is a tiefling under these circumstances? Why are the demons so chaotic by their nature? If they're so chaotic, how are they able to infiltrate the human kingdom so much? Is this a byproduct of the icon, and has the Blue Baron been around for a while or not? Where do the Psi demons come from? Are all the Psi demons from space? I have questions upon questions, and unfortunately no answers. But I'm hoping we'll get some in the future. Again, I do highly recommend you give this game a look, especially if you're even remotely interested in the story. And if nothing else, just to support the developer, because I'd love to see more from this. I guess that's all I've got. I do want to say a quiet at the end here thing that nobody else is going to see because nobody watches these videos to the end, but I do want to say a shout out to Mr. Red specifically, who actually got this game on my radar and did a little bit of work on the game, and of course is the primary donator for it, I think. I'm not even sure, because this game was funded a while ago. But, you know what? One last thing. I just realized one last way I could put this. If you're into System Shock, this is a game for you. I do hope you've enjoyed my thoughts, as chaotic and ill-sentence structured as they are. I'll see you next time.